Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week with an album review, which is where we check out an entire album track by track, exploring what each track does in isolation and its purpose within the larger work. Today we're going to be looking at a massive throwback to the beginning of this channel. We're going to be looking at the Microhones The Glow Part 2. This is their 2001 album. There are 20 tracks on this at 66 minutes, much like 2 weeks ago where we had a big track list and a long runtime. We're probably looking at a 4.5 hour video here. We're going to kick this off with the opening two tracks, I Want Wind to Blow and The Glow Part 2. I have done reactions to this years ago, which is where the big throwback thing comes in. But I never got around to checking out more from the Microhones, so I think this is going to be a great opportunity to do that. There's some really interesting track titles in here, and if I remember correctly, these first two tracks run into each other, and I don't know if that's going to be true of everything, so I have no idea where the stop-start element of today's reaction is going to sit. I guess we're just going to listen to stuff until I feel like I need to talk about stuff, and then we'll take breaks at those moments for analysis. Alright, let's dive into this, starting off at the beginning. I Want Wind to Blow. Now, I don't remember this at all. There's only one thing from these two songs that I remember, and it just got seared into my mind, and I am not ready for it, knowing it's coming up.
The lightning let up, the clacking shutters just shut up. There's no black or white, no changing the light. No
Interesting clipping on the vocal bit there. Didn't even sound like you got too loud.
The smell of bars, the awful feeling of
very cool.
Under fluorescent lights, there's sacrifice, there's hard feelings, there's pointless waste.
Just really leaning into that dissonance. I want to hear that dyad again though. Time is loose as well.
But there's no hope for me. I've been set free. There's no breeze, there's no ship on my sea.
like a slow burn that just doesn't go anywhere. We just are here. Which I think sort of lines up. He spoke about having a boat with no breeze, so he's just kind of stuck there, I think is the point of this. I'm also extrapolating one single line that I might have heard wrong. We'll dig more into that when I read the full lyrics. So blown out. Alright, we're gonna pause here. I don't think the two songs actually go into each other like I remember they doing. Like I remember them doing. Oh, maybe they do. Ah, jeez. Yeah, we're gonna stop here. There's just too much I need to talk about in order to get this foundation rolling on this album. First of all, two fans of the Microhones. Where does this sit in like pop culture chat? Because I'm looking here. They've had 23-ish years. No, September. So 22 years to accrue plays, right? Or I guess whenever Spotify came out, from then till now. I don't know if Spotify was around in 01. I don't think so. That sounds very wrong to my ears. But maybe I'll have to look that up later. I think that's the second time I've questioned Spotify's existence at a specific time. Probably should just get to know when this platform rose up. Regardless, they only is kind of a weird word. They have 16 million plays on that specific track. I Want Wind to Blow. They have still 200,000 monthly listens. They're not a big band, but they're not a small band either. But I bring this up because musically, I hear a lot of the indie rock sound that was really prolific in the 2000s. I don't know so much about 2001. They could have really been on the forefront of this sound. But it does remind me of some stuff that I remember playing on department store radios that sounded just like this. The same type of vocal delivery, the same type of restricted instrumental palette, working with simple ideas and a few instruments and a similar type of vocal delivery. And so there's parts of this that are nostalgic to me, even though I wasn't a real big fan of this type of music. I still heard it a lot, and listening to this takes me back to a very specific time in my life. But there's so many micro, I don't even know what to call them. They're micro wrongnessness, micro imperfections. That's probably the word I want. It's not wrong. They're just doing things in a way that is less than palatable, particularly with time, rhythm, and harmony. We'll get into all this in a little bit though. And that I really feel like with just a little bit of tightening up, they could have been a massive band. But because they really went for that indie human side of writing, which I knew going in, because this is one of the biggest things I remember commenting about, specifically regarding the glow. Because, like I said, I don't think I remember much of this track, and it's been like 3 years since I listened to this. So, but I knew I was coming in for lo-fi, indie, very human and raw recording and production. But they're all things that I wouldn't think would be too popular. I would have figured this was a smaller underground project, but 16 million plays isn't really underground. Granted, again, it's over a long period of time. Big bands hit 15, 16, 20 million within like their first year. So it's obviously not a massive thing, but it's bigger than I would have expected, I think. And so that's why I'm kind of curious if you were a fan of them at the time, or if you're just knowledgeable about the history of the group. How prolific were they in the 2000s? Like, did we even have MySpace? I think we had MySpace in 2001. So there was a social media to facilitate a wider, more global word of mouth for stuff like this. But still, like, I don't know, these numbers just seem really high for my idea of what we're listening to and its level of popularity. So I'm just kind of curious about that. Moving on, because I feel like we talked about that for just a hair bit too long. Micro imperfections. There's a lot of them in here. The first one I pointed out was harmony. They lean into some subtle tensions through dissonance at times. It's not that they are a hyper dissonant tone. I certainly wouldn't put them in the avant-garde world of using dissonance, but a lot of the vocal pitches are just off enough for me to notice. Just a hair bit flat, hair bit sharp, not going for that perfect intonation. There are some notes that are less in tune than others, and there's a variety of this levels of intonation. It is a very human approach to the production side of things to have recorded these and said, this is good enough. It's very independent, very human, very raw, not going for that perfection. But there's also an element of that human imperfection in the rhythmic timing of things. I'd mentioned in the reaction that time is sort of a suggestion. Some instruments, even the vocals at times, come in just a hair behind the beats. It drags in a lot of ways, but keeps going. I'm not the biggest fan of this. I'm trying to acclimate to it. It's an artistic decision and one that seems intentional here. Once again, I feel like any of these things could have been rectified with time, maybe a bit more effort, more takes. But at whatever point during the recording, they said this is good enough. And they rolled with it. And so, I'll be honest, this first track was a bit of a difficult listen for me because of that. Even, like I said, despite knowing going into this that imperfection is a part of at least the tracks I'd listened to, I think I don't remember it being this rough. I'm hoping it all sort of connects with me in a few tracks once I kind of get my head around all of it. But yeah, a bit of a tough listen, primarily because of the three guitars. We have a right pan, a left, two left pans, maybe a left and a center. I don't remember where they're placed. Um, they're all generally doing the same thing, emphasizing the same beats, having a generally similar rhythmic flow to them. They're all generally in the same area, they're all in the same key. They're unified in a lot of ways, but rhythmically they're not, and it kind of turns into a mess at times when they're supposed to be playing something identical rhythmically, and they come in just ahead of or just behind another guitar, and it sounds like you're in an echo chamber, a very small echo. Like as soon as you say something, somebody else is saying something immediately after you, or it's bouncing off the walls immediately. It's not a delayed thing like yelling into a canyon. But there's no reverb on anything to cover this up, to sort of give it this echoey feel. It's just one person's behind the beat. And so instead of having the cleanliness of everybody playing the note on the beat and then the note on the next beat, it's sort of a jumbled collection of notes generally placed around a beat and then the same thing on the next. It's messy. It's difficult to follow. It kind of works at times. I think part of the imperfections here is something that I talked about with the harmonies, that the level of intonation or lacking of being in tune is varied. Sometimes the harmonies are great and sometimes the harmonies are bad. Sometimes the harmonies are consonant and sometimes the harmonies are dissonant. Let's go a bit more objective on this. The same thing happens here. I think sometimes the cluttered mess of notes works better than others. There are certainly some parts of this track that felt like they were ready to fall apart. So many ideas just off from each other, ready to just crumble under the loss and lacking of time signature, of meter, flow. But they collect themselves, get everything tied back together, and play a little tighter on the next time through. Like I said, I think I have to get my head around it. I wasn't quite ready for this coming into it. And it's all about mindset. I think in a few tracks it'll start to be okay. Maybe even grow on me. Who knows? But it stood out a ton here. And the last thing we got to touch on is the end, which is just all the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And it goes on for quite some time. I think it has thematic purpose. I think it fits in with the storytelling that the lyrics were going with. It's not for me though. I need something else happening. I thought it was neat for them to fade out everything but the drums to keep the drums going. I was like, where's this going to take us? This is creating anticipation. We have just the drum on the downbeat. It lasted a little longer than I think it needed to, but we brought something back in. And it was the same thing we had been listening to, except now we have this snare drum that's clipping so bad it sounds like it's coming out of a blown out speaker. And yeah, it's a change, it's contrast, it's a variation on what we were listening to, but I don't think it fundamentally changed anything, and at least for my tastes, I found it less fun to listen to with this drum in it now. I know this is a lo-fi project. We actually heard clipping on the vocal line in like the first verse, which I thought was interesting. I mean, he's not really singing too loud. You can tell he's not belting or projecting. It's more of a lighter volume. And my guess is that he has to crank the gain up in order for the vocals to be at a decent level despite having sung them quietly. And so even the slightest adjustment in volume, going a little bit higher, is going to lead to that. And once again, it's one of those decisions where they say, it's fine. We're going to leave it like that. This group definitely likes their imperfections. It shows in the opening track, and I think it's a great thesis track. I don't know what the rest of the songs are going to sound like, but at least knowing what the Glow Part 2 does, I'd say if you can make it past this first track, you're probably going to enjoy parts of this album. If you listen to this first track and hate it, I wager the rest of the album's not going to do much more for you. We'll explore more of that as we go on, but they really do showcase who they are and what kind of music they make on this opening track. Let me hit some lyrics and then we'll move on from there. Alright, so we have a song about stagnation after a boom in life. Kind of a lull after a high point, I suppose. It says the thunderclouds broke up, the rain dried up, the lightning let up, the clacking shutters shut up. There's no black or white, no change in the light, no night, no golden sun. There's no contrast. It just is. The light doesn't change. I don't see the night. I don't see the sun. There's no black and white. There's no extremes. There's just this constantly, whatever it is. It says the sound of cars, the smell of bars, the awful feeling of electric heat under fluorescent lights. There's sacrifice. There's hard feelings. There's pointless waste. It's all about just being here in whatever state, whatever present, whatever area he's in, mentally and physically. It's just not great form anymore. The bridge says I want wind to blow, to sweep me off my feet, to not bring me back. It says I have no head to hold in grief, and there's no hope for me. Yeah, it's about, well, it kind of feels like being in depression. About just how everything is blah and boring and gray, unchanging. It's a rut. And he wants the wind to blow. He wants something to get him out of it. He doesn't know how to do it himself. Anything just to get him away from here. Which, yeah, I mentioned stagnation in the musical analysis, especially regarding the instrumental part. That's exactly what it's feeling stuck. That's what the song's about. And musically, I think it does a great job of embodying that. And as much as I wanted to get out of that repetitive instrumental bit, I'm sure that's reflective of him wanting to get out of his rut as well. What I also find interesting is there is an annotation on the word instrumental here at the end. It says, "This is God's work." I'm curious, I brought this up, fans of this type of music. Well, actually, I was thinking about it. Fans of this type of music, though, do you enjoy this extended, repetitive section? Because, I didn't. I think I've made that clear. But apparently some people do just really enjoy that. To me, it was more of a thematic, artistic thing. I felt like I wanted to get out of it. It put me in the same shoes as our narrator. But I guess some people just really love the sound of that. They didn't get the same journey I went on. Very interesting. All right, let's keep going. That's the wrong one. There we go. Push forward with the Glow Part 2. I'm going to rewind this back because I know we're a couple seconds into it. I want to start from the beginning. Let's go.
took my shirt off in the yard.
See about guitars being slightly rhythmically out of place. This one feels more intentional than last time though.
Now it's not. My shirt's back on. I forgot my songs. The glow is gone. My gliding body stopped. That I'm still living. I'm still flesh. I hold on to awful feelings. I'm not dead. There's no end. My face is red. My blood.
I like that bass kick. It's produced in a way that it didn't feel like it was coming out of my headphones. I do like all the movement here. The bass line is a really nice addition. I don't think we had much bass in I Want Wind to Blow. I wasn't expecting it to just abruptly stop like that. It really seemed like it was going to flow into the next track. I was ready to say, okay, we're just going to keep it rolling, but it didn't. I don't know how to feel about this track. I vividly remember that second section with all the elongated vocal notes, just holding them out and allowing the production to clip into it, slurring, sliding into those higher tones. I remember that being really affecting. last time we checked this out. And I want to say I was brought to tears, or I started tearing up. I think my eyes got wet, something like that. I don't know. It really struck me though. And I was looking forward to that here, and maybe because I was looking forward to it, it just didn't happen. But even worse than that, I found myself sort of being annoyed with many of the compositional choices and production choices here. And I found myself thinking this one idea. If this were more traditionally recorded, not saying clean up everything. I think a real part of the charm and part of the emotional resonance comes from the rawness of it. But I think it's too raw in a few different ways, and it takes me out of the experience. Which is interesting because it didn't do that last time. Granted, we're talking 3, maybe 4 years now. I don't remember when we listened to this, but it was very close to the beginning of the channel's life. Time changes people. But my view on this track, from what I can remember about what I said last time, and actually I think when I pause for lyrics, I'm gonna go watch a little bit of my first reaction then, go look at my baby face and see what I was thinking back then. And kind of do a little bit of compare and contrast. Maybe not on camera, but I am kind of curious to see where I was at then. Because I know where I'm at now, and this track just did not work for me. And it's for, many of the reasons I brought up with Wind to Blow. There is a complexity in rhythm here that I pointed out. There is a really cool, I don't know what you would call it. The two guitars in our opening riff, they have this da 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 dum da 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 dum da da dum dum. It's a pretty simple rhythm, and they create complexity by offsetting it by half a beat, maybe 1 beat. It's a small offset. They both do the same thing, but it means that that faster da da dun at the beginning of every riff is cluttered because they're not doing it at the same time. And so while it's a simple riff on its own, it becomes a complex riff when we introduce this offset in the second time through it with the second instrument. It is a neat idea. I think it absolutely works sometimes, and I think it could work in theory. But in execution, when we also bring in the lack of rigid temporal alignment, that these instruments are not playing 100% with the tempo, it's already a cluttered duet between these two, and they're cluttering it even more with the inconsistency of time, and it just makes it that much more frustrating to listen to. If the inconsistencies were consistent, I could chalk it up to an extra layer of complexity on the rhythmic element, but it isn't. Sometimes the second guitar comes in a bit late, sometimes the first guitar is a bit early, and it changes the temporal distance between these ideas, just making it a mess. It works thematically, and I think that's going to be my big thing here, is that generally speaking, at least based on the lyrics of these two, um, it's about being human and the messiness of being human, and things aren't always perfect and great. I'm sure the rest of the album's going to be like that. I think musically it's really cool to put this extra human touch on things, to allow the songs to be raw and imperfect, just like the characters, the narrators are in these songs. But it makes it difficult for me to listen to them. There are some times when it clicks for me. Some of the rhythmic decisions in I Want Wind to Blow worked. The clipping on the vocals in the second half of the Glow Part 2 generally I think work. It's a way of adding that compression to it, of creating this level of anxiety, of desperation, of extremity to the vocal style without having to put on natural compression, which I'm sure is very difficult to do while still achieving this tone. After all, as I mentioned, this is sort of more on the effortless side of music, of vocal delivery. Not that it is effortless, but that it sounds effortless, much in the way that um, I guess older Billie Eilish stuff. It's quieter delivered. It has a softer voice to it. It doesn't have a lot of volume. It feels like someone who's timid and then uses gain later to bring the volume up to where it's supposed to be in order for it to sound more song-like. I think it's a great angle to go, especially for this type of music. It works really well in the atmosphere that we have, and it pairs well with the lyrics. It's difficult to have that vocal delivery and put compression on it in a way that feels right, primarily because of something I've talked about in the past, which is expected auditory sounds. A quiet electric guitar sounds wrong because the grittiness, the distortion, the overdrive tells us that it's supposed to be loud, too loud. I mean, that's what overdrive is. It's cranking the volume past clipping and allowing the clipping to create the distortion and the crackles in the guitar line. To have a quiet, overdriven sound is an oxymoron, and I think most people recognize that on a subconscious level. Quiet screams and really loud whispers sound weird because it's just not the volume that would be delivered with the texture. And so putting heavy compression on here, even if the vocalist could achieve that in a way that worked and didn't sound hokey or something, still would sound a bit off because we tend to associate compression with screaming and yelling. It comes from volume distortion, of pushing our vocal cords past their limits. So utilizing clipping instead to deliver these crackles on top of this quieter vocal delivery is 100% the right way to go about doing it. And in that specific section, I think it works really well. But the clipping is not something that always works for me. The opening overblown electric guitar at the beginning of Glow Part 2 was not my cup of tea. The overblown snare in Want Wind to Blow was not my cup of tea. And I feel like this is going to be the album going forward. Is that from a thematic perspective, I can see how some of these choices are the best way to do something or a good way to approach an idea or a theme or a concept or an atmosphere, but that generally speaking, I don't know that I'm going to be enjoying much of this album on the whole. Let's hit some lyrics for the Glow Part 2, and then we'll push forward. Interestingly enough, at least so far, the lyrics have been a small part of the tracks themselves. Not just that they take up a small amount of time and where we have lengthy instrumental sections aside from them, but also that the lyrics are just generally short when written out in prose. This one is about, well, it's sort of about two things. Our first verse is just about being vulnerable. He says, I took my shirt off in the yard. No one saw that the skin on my shoulders was golden. Now it's not. My shirt's back on. It's like I bared myself to the world and no one took note of it. So I'm not doing that anymore. I'm covering myself back up again, putting up the walls. Interestingly though, I like this, assuming that this is autobiographical in any way. It says, I forgot my songs, the glow is gone, my body stopped. Almost about forgetting the past, wanting to be so distant from it, to just say, it's gone. I forgot my songs. Verse 2, though, is different. Verse 2 speaks about overcoming hardship, coming out the other side, and, well, I think an interview that he did, Phil, the vocalist and the lyric writer, said, um, he says another part of this track is being annoyed at your heart for still beating. He says not that he was suicidal or anything, just, it's a typical old relationship didn't work out kind of thing, and now my heart hurts and it still keeps beating. Kind of mad at it for that. Just general emo sentiment. I think this is probably one of the things where the album's going to work best for me is that so far the lyrics are very emo, and I am kind of enjoying them. But he says, I couldn't get through September without a battle. I faced death. I went in with arms swinging, but I heard my own breath, and I had to face that I'm still living. I'm still flesh. I hold on to these awful feelings. There's no end to this. My blood flows harshly and my heart beats loudly. My chest still draws breath. There's no end. Yeah, it's a very overdramatic read of what Phil mentioned was about heartbreak. He even says, looking back on this track, I was a bit more dramatic back then. I faced death is kind of a ridiculous line considering I was talking about having my feelings hurt. And it is, but I think it's one of the endearing elements of emo lyrics in general, or anything that goes over dramatic. It's sort of like the heightened brutality of the music and lyrics in death metal. There's a campiness to it that absolutely works. The cheesiness of power metal absolutely works. Emo kids being dramatic and talking up heartbreak and the end of relationships as facing death is what I live for. It's ridiculous in hindsight, especially with the experience of life. A lot of emo lyrics come about from teenagers and 20 somethings, and they are ridiculous when looked at by an older adult, a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, a 50-year-old, especially when you look back on your own lyrics. I know I look back at some of the poetry I wrote in college and think, wow, that's ridiculous, but it's also endearing. There's just something about this that works because it's done to such an extreme, much in the same way as I mentioned as death metal and power metal. It would be like getting mad at a B flick because the writing is bad or the acting is bad or the practical effects or CGI are bad. Like that's kind of, it comes with it. It's the charm of low budget production. And I suppose this kind of wraps back to the production and performance side of these two tracks. There is certainly a charm to all of this. I don't want anyone to walk away from this, at least especially at this point. I don't know where my opinions are going to land by the end of the album, but I don't want anyone to think that I'm bashing the choices that went into this album. I do think that they generally work. It does feel human and raw and messy, and it lines up with the lyrical themes as well. This is certainly a total package where everything, I think, complements each other, as odd as the choices may be. It just isn't something that is complimentary or palatable to my ears. It's a totally subjective opinion about the music. But I think on a totally objective level, this is well done. We'll leave it at that. All right. We're going to keep pushing forward. Next up, we have The Moon. This is one of the longer tracks, maybe the longest track at 5:16. Yes. Oh no, there is a 9. Everything is about 4 minutes. There's a lot of 1 and 2 minutes in here. There are two 5 minute tracks and then a 9.5 minute ending. Just had to throw the whole thing out of whack. This is one of the longer ones though. We'll probably run a few of these back to back. So there are some super short ones nearby. I don't know. Let's see. Let's just dive into see what's going on with the moon. I'm curious if all of this is done in one take. Because that's the third time through this passage, and it's different every time. Yeah, I don't think that there's any looped, repeated ideas here. I think every single note has been played. This is at least 8 times through, and I don't see a pattern between intonation and rhythmic discrepancies.
I drove up to the city and found a place where you stayed and walked around and stayed up late under city lights. I spent the night next to you.
I just did a double check to make sure there wasn't a tab of music playing, because this... What? I like this. I wonder what the process is to record for this. A very filled production. 16 seconds of silence. Oh. Oh? What an intriguing decision.
I got hit hard, I'm on the ground. And if you swing again, I'll duck. But I wish you the best of luck. You deserve yourself. And I'll return from my trip to hell as a headless horseman. 'Cause oh, what a loss. I went back to get my stuff, and it was tangled up and tough. I stood there and stared you down, and I walked aimlessly around with a flaming pumpkin head. Oh, what a loss. My soft hands replaced by claws. You turned me into a stray dog from a mighty human man. Oh, what a loss. Oh, what a loss. I miss my closest friend, and now I cling to rocks in wind. It's a precious thing we lost.
Yeah, I like that. That's a nice track. I really appreciate the more complex composition, but this feels cohesive to me. And I think that's because there just isn't a lot going on. We have chords giving us 3 notes, give or take, 4 notes maybe. So his melody lines don't necessarily feel as dissonant because there's less stuff to clash against. But also simultaneously, I think his intonation was a lot better on this one. Makes me wonder how much of it in our previous tracks was intentional, really leaning into these. I kind of got the feeling that he was a self-taught vocalist and just not really great at it. Not tone deaf, but not the strongest at maintaining an exact pitch. But here, I think it works rather well. There's certainly a few notes in here that I felt were a little off, but for the most part, intonation's not really that big of an issue here. And rhythmically, it's rather consistent throughout as well. We had a couple of dips there at the end, but that just leans into the idea that I think a lot of this is close to one take. Much like I mentioned at the beginning of the Moon, I hear a lot of inconsistencies between repetition of a riff of an idea that it doesn't feel like they recorded something once and then reused it over and over and over. It feels like everything in here is played originally, and so we have inconsistencies at random places. And we do have a little bit of slowing down there at the end of Headless Horseman that I think it kind of works. As I don't know if it's intentional or not. It sounds unintentional to me, but I think it works at bringing the song down to a close. It happened with like 15 seconds to go, and I think it worked really well. One of those happy accidents, possibly. I could listen to a whole album of this. I could probably eventually get to a point where I listen to a whole album of The Glow, stuff like The Glow. But this, I think, works with my tastes right here, and I'd love to hear more of this. It's raw enough in ways that present it as a more human sound without dipping into a lack of palatability. It sounds earnest, yet still polished, and I think that's where this album is going to shine for me the most, where the glow will shine. There's a joke in there somewhere. One thing I really love about what this track specifically showed me, but a little bit on The Moon as well, I don't think I picked up on it on the other tracks, is guitar sounds. Because it feels underproduced and linearly recorded in that they don't reuse any sections, it feels like everything is legitimately played. There's a lot of stray guitar sounds, string buzz, and all sorts of stuff going on that I really love. I've talked about this a lot in the past, whether it's cutting off the breath parts of singing or removing string buzzing or string noise or picks clattering against the body of a guitar or whatever. I love it when this stuff is left in. This is the part of the human element that I like in music, not the imperfections of humanity, but well, I guess this is imperfections. It's just not musical imperfections, it's sonic ones. Although I still think that breathing in a song is not an imperfection, and it's like, this is my hill to die on, I suppose, when it comes to music. Pop music needs to stop removing breaths. It is the weirdest phenomenon, and it sounds so weird to not hear a vocalist sing, or not hear a vocalist breathe after holding out a long note. It's like, how did this become the norm? Why they're not robots, they're humans, they breathe. It's part of the performance. It always has been part of the performance. In a lot of ways it's part of the vocal line in itself. I hate it so much. I'm off topic though. I love those little imperfections that are showing through, and I think Headless Horseman was a really great display of some of the guitar stuff that kind of could be produced out in a more hi-fi production, and here it just absolutely stands. Some of it doesn't sound great, but the fact that it's in there, it's what the guitar sounded like. Something the guitar did when he strummed the strings, and they're like, well, that's what the guitar wanted to do there. We'll leave it in. And I suppose this is sort of taking the good with the bad. I think there's definitely a skill in saying we want something a bit rawer, but not super raw, and drawing a line at what imperfections are left in and what imperfections are going to be removed or re recorded to avoid. But there's something about the microphones where they say, let it all stay. I almost wonder how many times they recorded any of this. If you told me that all of these were completely cold, they came in, did a little bit of warming up, and then just recorded all 20 songs back to back and left the studio, I'd probably believe you. It almost feels like whatever is produced in the studio just got left in, regardless of what kind of non-traditional sound it creates. There's so much in here that's left up to chance, and I think I'm not a big fan of that. I'm hyper controlled over my music, but I think it's really cool to listen to art where the artist says, I'm not in control of all of it. There's going to be happy accidents in here. There's going to be some things that I think maybe don't work as well as if maybe I put a little bit more control over it, but I'm going to go wherever the shoe lands, wherever the coin lands. What is that phrase? I'm going to do whatever happens. That's what I'm going to deliver, and I'm going to leave some of this up to fate, some of it up to chance. And I really have to appreciate an artist who does that. I have nothing but admiration for the steadfastness to do that. Just put the boot in and say, "Yep, I'm not super happy with that, but let's go with it." Now, Moon, this was a very different track, primarily because it was so big. We've had layered sections in some of these songs so far, but the Moon really took it to the next level and filled the soundscape. I think part of that was the overdrive on the electric guitar, but it's still a massive sound. So much so that I think it gets muddy a bit in a way that the other tracks haven't. There's been a lot of rhythmic muddiness going on in some of these songs, but this was production muddiness. There was just too much happening, and it sort of it still had a little bit of that indie separation, but on some level it was like wall of sound. It was really difficult for me to pinpoint everything unless I really focused in on it. I don't know. It was busy. I think that's the best term I can use for it. And maybe just like the other songs, we get into the lyrics and it's about being busy. It's about just always moving to the next thing and not really thinking about much. And yeah, I mean, maybe it's thematically accurate. I found it to be very anxious. Can't quite say I enjoyed my time with that, but it was followed up by Headless Horseman, which I absolutely adored. So I guess I can give it a pass, yeah? I don't know. I don't have anything to add to that. I don't have any big takeaway on it, but it just stands out against everything else. It's like just a massive sound. It's distinct. Continuing on with the themes that we have at play of failed relationships and heartbreak, and somebody trying to get out of that slump. We have another song. This one, though, is about this person going back to their previous partner's home. Well, where they grew up. I don't know if it's not necessarily their house anymore. It's where they grew up though. And reminiscing about some of the best times that they had. The chorus says, I went back to feel alone there. I went back to wipe it clean. The idea of hoping that maybe just being here will allow me to move on, to see it all once again, to relive some stuff. Of course it doesn't. That's just a surefire way to make you feel worse, is to reminisce about some of the good times and then now you're missing them too. We have 4 verses worth of reminiscing that continue to come back to the chorus of saying, I went there to feel alone and to wipe it all clean, to feel regret, to be there by myself. But the last chorus changes. It says, I went out last night to forget all that. I went out and stared it down, but the moon just stared back at me, and in its light I saw my 2 feet on the ground. I kind of dig that. I don't know if it's specifically pushing towards an idea of self-reflection. The annotation on Genius says that that's what this chorus is pointing towards. I can see the angle, right? But I'm not 100% sure. But I do love how he's trying to find something that helps him move on. And he doesn't. In fact, even worse, he just kind of finds himself alone. Unlike, well, actually, he wished in I Want Wind to Blow something to push me along. I'm not going to do this myself. I need something to get me out of this rut. Here, I think he's found the answer. It's himself. He's got to do it. I don't know if he understands that, though. He just feels alone. It's me, the moon staring back at me. I'm the only one here, the only 2 feet on the ground. And Headless Horseman appears to be about, I don't know, losing friends is like losing a head, something quite vital and important, and you're certainly going to miss. And a mythological creature that doesn't have their head is the Headless Horseman. So I guess that's where that comes together. I'm not going to say this is my favorite set of lyrics so far, but I think I kind of get it. Eventually, he also loses his hands, possibly from losing another friend. Verse 4 says, I miss my closest friend. It's a very different way of speaking about an ended relationship than the other tracks, which makes me think that those are about lost love interests. This one seems to be about a friend. I'm going to say more of a platonic friendship. But at the beginning, a relationship ends and they lose their head. They become the flaming pumpkin head, the Headless Horseman. And in verse 3, they lose their closest friend, and in turn, their hands are replaced by claws. Like I said, I can kind of see the metaphor on this. I don't think it's the strongest of writing, though, especially not after the past 3 tracks. Alright, we're going to push forward and check out a few songs because they're all rather short. Alright, kicking it off next, we got My Roots Are Strong and Deep. As I said, there's a few of these that are going to be on the shorter side, so we'll probably listen to a few. Let's dive into it.
My roots are strong and deep. I'm swaying in your breeze. My limbs stretch out to me. You've got me on my knees.
Such a bizarre shift there. I mean, I suppose it's not the first time we've had an unusual movement between two tracks. Also, to borrow the shifting sides from the vocal part on the last one, give it to the guitars here is an interesting callback, I suppose, to the last track. I like how it's just called instrumental too. Okay, this is nice. But it took 70% of the track to get here. We listened to a minute of root note chord progression. I almost feel like a lot of these songs are supposed to make me frustrated in the same way that our narrator is. And if so, I mean, it's working perfectly. The emotional parallels crafted into the music, it's a nice touch.
There's no glory, there's a slow resounding story. There's no place to feel certain, there's nobody waiting for me. There's no stand of trees, no morning, there's a curve without a warning. There's weird and lasting sadness, there's no large and lengthy warming. There's no heat, there's no expansion, there's no door into the mansion. Lengthy warming, sweet.
I really like the atmosphere on this one.
Sweet and substantial. There's no flash. There's no fingers in my hair, I see a tunnel. We built walls tall and solid, between the treasure and the shovel. I see and I see a fountain, there's a trail over the mountain. There's no wayside, there's no stopping, and the peak is wide and rocky. There's no ceiling in the mansion, there's no waste, no hesitation. There's no crack of dawn, no morning, just an everlasting warming.
Hmm. Again. What was the other track we had that on? Was it the moon? Maybe it was the glow part two. There was like 16 seconds of silence. And then just like in the middle of that, boom, it's like the strumming of a guitar. One note. To do it once is an eccentricity. It's an oddity. To do it twice is the beginning of a pattern. Hmm. I feel like this is a portion of the album where we move from several songs about wanting direction, about knowing where you are and wanting to be able to move forward, to get out of it. These last three tracks have been about isolation, not about moving, about stagnancy. My roots are strong and deep was one chord progression, I think. I don't think we had two sections in there. Instrumental was, well, it was one chord progression with a flurry of beauty that was, it left as quickly as it came. And then the mansion is musically meandering. It doesn't do anything, it doesn't go anywhere. It kind of lacks identity, and through that, it has its own identity, at least within the album. It's quite unique in its approach to composition, given how everything else is written in a more traditional indie rock fashion. You put a chord progression under some melody writing, and sometimes you put a rhythm behind that. Bam, you got a song. This is pure texture, pure atmosphere. I don't even think we had a chord progression in a single bit of it. The lyrical line just is. The notes that the vocalist chooses are. They don't point towards anything, they don't go anywhere, they don't tell a story, they just exist. They just happen to be the notes that are used to sing this line. There's no planning, it feels, that goes into it. And so the mansion comes off as very bleak, very monotone. It's interesting, like I said, to see these three in this group here. I'm curious where we're going next with something and something dash one, something negative one. I'm not sure how to read that one. But I thought this whole song was going to be love songs. The glow would be the joy you feel in a relationship, and the glow is missing. That's what has been prevalent in. Ooh! Let me back up to the moon real quick. Okay, so he didn't use the word glow. The album has been about losing the glow. Somebody near you, or the relationship you have with them, and it makes you happy. It makes things bright. They emanate a glow on you. The chorus of The Moon says that he went out and stared at it, and it stared back, and in its light I saw my own 2 feet. He talked about, in the Glow Part 2, I think it was, maybe it was I Want Wind to Blow, about not seeing light or darkness. No black or white, everything is gray and bleak. Maybe I dismissed this final chorus of The Moon too soon. It certainly pulls in some of these themes we had been exploring lyrically, such as light and glow, and puts them in a different perspective. The moon's light, the moon's glow was on my 2 feet, and I saw them in the dark due to the moon's light. Clever. All right. Is there anything else I want to bring up here? Oh, yeah, frustration, man. So, our lyricist, our narrator, again, I don't know how autobiographical any of this stuff is. I'm going to refer to it as the narrator rather than Phil. The narrator is disappointed with life, they're frustrated with life, they want things to move on, to be something more than they are. They want to find that glow again, and they can't. They've tried several things, and, well, nothing's worked. I feel that frustration listening to the music. Every time there's something that I enjoy, it's paired with something I don't, or it's something that leaves too soon, or when I find a track I did enjoy, like Headless Horseman, it's followed up by songs that dwell in repetition, in mundanity, in cyclicality. Instrumental, I think, is the song that has rubbed me the wrong way the most on this track. It is 1 minute of root note chord progressions on a guitar in a sort of annoying production style of quarter note flipping back and forth between left and right channel. I thought it was interesting to bring this over because this same effect was on the vocals in track 5, My Roots Are Strong and Deep, but without anything to go along with it, it's just this oscillating tone. There's nothing going on melodically, nothing going on harmonically. We have the chord progression given to us by these singular notes, and that's it. We hear one note for an extended amount of time, just flipping back and forth. I found this to be rather aggravating to listen to. I was becoming frustrated with my situation. I wanted the next song to come up sooner. I wanted something to change here. We did get something to change. We had this moment of beauty around the 1 minute mark of instrumental, and it was gone in a flash. It faded out quickly, and we moved to the mansion, which was, as I mentioned, sort of meandering. It doesn't do anything or go anywhere. It just sort of is in a lot of ways. So it returned back to a feeling of frustration for me. Again, when I find things I like, they're subtle moments of the album surrounded by elements that don't quite work for me. It puts me in a specific mindset that I think parallels our narrator. I don't know if this is the intended experience. I think most people make music to enjoy, and I do find that, at least in the comments and annotations on Genius, fans do legitimately enjoy what's going on in the instrumentation of this album, where I'm finding the most frustration and thus parallels with the narrator. I am right along with them on this journey. I think most people aren't. Most fans, anyways, aren't. Where they're enjoying the music and having a split of emotion where they enjoy the music but they're emotionally devastated by the lyrics or the harmonies, the chord progressions. I'm curious then, let me know in the comments if you're a fan of this album and if you find that split, that divide, or are you just as frustrated with it as I am and you actually enjoy that thematic resonance. I think I'm coming around to the album though. We're almost up to the halfway point and it feels like it's gone by in a breeze. I'm not disliking the album, but it is a frustrating listen, though I think I appreciate the thematic element to that. There's very few albums that I listen to where I'm 100% on board with the art, with the character, with the, whatever. Usually I say, oh, this is a sad song, but I'm enjoying it. That kind of vibe. I think it's really only in happy music where the emotional resonance is through the roof. The music is bouncy and happy. I'm bouncy and happy because of that. The lyrics are bouncy and happy. The vocals list, the character, whatever. Everything is hyper synergistic there. Both, well, actually, across the performance, the theoretical side, and the listening experience. But when it comes to music that isn't happy or joyous or anything like that, I think it's harder to reach that point because if your music is full of despair, anger, eh, anger might be a little different. Um, but especially in the realm of sadness, you want to make your listener feel sad alongside you or your character, whatever story you're telling. But sadness isn't something that most people enjoy, so they wouldn't like the album. They might enjoy the experience of it, but the music itself is not going to be something that they would describe as fun, generally speaking. And I think that's what's happening here. It's a really interesting artistic endeavor to make something difficult to listen to, not enjoyable to listen to, because you're making art and not commercial music. I'm gonna hit the lyrics on these two. Instrumental doesn't have any. We'll keep pushing forward and see where this theory of mine evolves to. My roots are strong and deep is a metaphor for the strength of this person if they were a tree. My roots are strong and deep. I'm swaying in your breeze. My limbs stretch out to meet you. You've got me on my knees. This other person he's trying to create this relationship with definitely has some power over him. He says, I stand tall, my feet are on the ground. So the roots are strong and deep. I'm not moving. This is where I am, right? He says, my limbs stretch out to meet you, but compared to you, I'm small. Verse 2 says, you're wrapped around the earth, you circle it with air, you're trapped inside the core with hot, hot lava hair. I don't know, that line, it's one of those endearing emo things. It's so over the top. It's kind of a ridiculous metaphor to make, especially if this other person, if it's a real person, is, it's red hair. Hot, hot lava hair. I love it. So this other person is around the earth and inside the earth. Something to do with atmosphere, possibly, but also hot lava. Volcano, the earth's core, something along those lines. He also says that I'm small compared to you. He's just a tree, and this other person is the earth itself. It's an interesting metaphor, I think. It speaks to the lack of self confidence that our narrator has. Taking away the metaphor of the tree and the planet, they're just two people. Yet he feels so insignificant around the other. And it creates an imbalance. It says, you've got me on my knees. There's a power imbalance there. Wouldn't always necessarily be a strong relationship because of that. But he still wants to give it a shot anyways. But it will never happen. As verse 2 ends, I wish you could sprout, but you can't stick your neck out. I want you climbing up my limbs, but I'm stumped by your whims. I wish you would notice me, is the idea here. It says, but I don't understand you. I don't know what it is that I would need to do to get your attention. It is an unrequited love story, told through the idea of a tree on a planet. One tree out of billions. I don't know how many trees are on this planet. Probably a lot. Probably more than I think. Probably a lot more than I think. I think even if I guessed a number, deliberately overshooting, I'd still probably way undershoot the actual number of trees on this planet. It's probably a mind-blowing number. But there's only one Earth. There's only one place this tree could survive. The significance of one to the other is massively different than the significance of the other to the one. Yeah, when I started this section, I didn't like I got it. I thought it was a pretty clear metaphor. I think that's one thing I like about Phil's writing is that it is poetic in a way. There's flowery ways to describe his feelings. He's never just out and about saying, "Oh, I'm sad and I wish I wasn't." Like it's always done in an interesting way, but it's not so far as depth for me to completely miss it. Even right here, I didn't come into this thinking it would be as deep as it was, but as I talked through it, I found this increasing depth to it, and that's not something that always happens. So I kind of appreciate that, where I can reach that element on my own, ish. Yeah, there's still the annotations. They're a nice crutch. They're helping a lot too. I'm not totally walking this on my own, but his words do make sense to me. Now, the mansion appears to be about what the narrator wants. Verse 1 says, "There's no end, no glory. There's a slow, resounding story. There's no place to feel certain. There's nobody waiting for me." Part of this sounds bad. We've already talked about at the beginning of this album how the unending grayness of life is something he's trying to avoid. He wants something new. He wants change. Right here at the beginning of verse 1 says there's no end. This put me in a negative mindset for it. Also says that there's nobody waiting for me. It says there's no stand of trees, no mourning. There's a weird and lasting sadness. I think this is all supposed to describe where he's at right now. What's interesting too is there's a line in here that says there's no sleepy hollow, calling back to the Headless Horseman from an earlier one. I'm not quite sure if there's more to that. Maybe there's a purpose to putting this in here, but at the very least, I see that we do have the callback there. Verse 2, though, speaks about the mansion. No heat, no expansion, no door for the mansion, lengthy warming, sweet removal, sweet expanse, sweet and substantial. There's so much sweet going on. No flesh, no fingers in my hair, I see a tunnel. We built walls tall and solid between the treasure and the shovel. What I think is important here is that there's no door in the mansion. Anyone can get into this. He says there's lengthy warming. One thing that I associate with the gray and bleakness that he's really focused on in most of these tracks is a coldness, a numbness to feeling, a numbness to excitement or joy or anything else. It's about feeling cold. You lack the warmness of humanity. And so, for this mansion to hold a lengthy warming, I think that's very enticing. He also says that in his normal life there's no expansion, but here he can find sweet expanse. Things can change. They go in every direction. You just go wherever you want. No expansion is about being contained where you are. There's no way to move from this. I also like the line, "We built walls tall and solid between the treasure and the shovel." I can clearly see the tools I need to find happiness, but I cannot use the tools in the place where the happiness is. I'm always one or the other. Or in this way, we've built a wall between them. I can't even access the tools anymore. Verse 3 continues on in this idea of describing the mansion as no ceiling, no waste, no hesitation, no crack of dawn, and no morning, just an everlasting warming. To feel whole again, to feel human, to feel like blood is pumping through you. Which, interestingly, is also something that came up in the Glow Part 2. Yeah, where he said, "My face is red, my blood flows harshly, and my heart beats loudly." As much as it sucked right there, as he had just come out of facing death, heartbreak, he felt alive at that moment. All the tracks after this have talked about a coldness. He wants to find that warmth again. He wants to feel alive. All right. Next up, again, we're going to do a few short ones. Everything here is less than 3 minutes long. We may just do all four back to back given how short they are. Let's dive in with something and then something -1. Oh, it continued on from the ambient room tones. So another song that just simply is something musical, I suppose. Something I'm appreciating is their ability to just let something be. It's still not something I would want to listen to all the time, but coming at it from a composer's perspective, I could not let songs just be. They've always got to be going somewhere. And so I find it very endearing that they can just reside in these sound spheres to let a simple idea go on for a minute. I can't do that. I've always got to add a new layer or change something up. Kind of envious about that. Here we go again. These row guitar notes at the end of these songs. What does it mean? It's the same note, isn't it? There's only one other track that we've heard that big booming sound on. And I can't, was it the moon? I mean, that right there sounds like a timpani, but there is a booming bass instrument in there too, a pitched one.
Reach my lost. Through rotting skin, I'll leave my coffin. Through calloused work, I will grow soft.
See, and this is one of those areas where I think the complex writing with the loose time is too busy.
Where we hotly radiate. Things are not complete there. Fastly glide.
There is one neat side effect of these layered vocals though. Uncertainty. I'll touch on that more after this track, I think. Oh. It's so hard to groove around with their music when all the instruments won't stay on beat.
I know you've seen the billowy black. You have been blinded by the gleam, and then your sight came back.
That was pretty neat. There's like wood squeaking at the end of that. Now, I mentioned uncertainty in the vocals at the end of I'll Not Contain You. I don't know what the lyrics are in that track, but the more that I hear songs with these dual vocals that are out of phase with each other, when paired with this softer vocal delivery, sounds like somebody very uncertain about the words they're saying. They lack the conviction to put the presence of power behind it. It could also just be a self confidence thing. They might fully believe what they're saying, but just lack the personality or social skills to deliver it in a way that sounds convincing. I think it certainly lines up with a lot of the characterizations of the narrator. I don't know if this is more of a conceptual album where we're exploring the feelings of all of one person, or if this is just a series of songs that are about different people and just generally have similar characteristics to them. And once again, it could all be about Phil himself. I don't know. I don't want to assume that Phil is doing anything autobiographical, as I said earlier, so I'm going to stick with the idea of the narrator. But it matches the characterization of our narrator in all of these tracks is someone who they feel small. They feel insignificant to the world. They feel insignificant specifically to love interests, to people in their lives. They are depressed, and depressed people are very rarely ones who can get up in the middle of a room and shout out with a strong conviction and vocal delivery of the things they want and need. If nothing else, by the end of this album, I think I'll have a very strong appreciation for the way that this album comes together cohesively in delivering a vision of depression on every level. Musically, it is tense. The lack of focus on intonation and rhythmic uh, being in rhythm, being in step with everyone else, feels like there's a lack of energy to the entire project, which makes sense for someone depressed. It's really hard to find the motivation to do stuff. The everything done in one track, or sorry, everything done in one take. If there's imperfections, leave them in there. I don't care. Feels like somebody just trying to get this done. It's not about the perfection because we barely had energy to do it once. It's finished. That feels pretty good. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting, which matches everything about these characters. It matches everything about the music. It's just everything comes together super cohesively to tell the story or stories of a person or persons who are just not too comfortable with themselves. They're not comfortable with their lives. They're not happy. They want more, don't know how to get it. They don't know how to talk to people. They're all very shy. And ultimately, they're all dealing with mental health too, particularly depression. And the songs absolutely feel like they were written by the person who is singing, which is a weird way to word that because obviously the singer was in the band and helped write the music. But you get the gist of it, right? The characters being presented feel like they also wrote the music. There is just such a synergy between the lyrical themes and stories and the musical ones. And whether I end up enjoying the sounds of this album over the next half of it, I don't think it can be overstated how much I'm enjoying this from an artistic perspective. Because it absolutely deserves any praise it gets, especially from that angle. I have listened to sorrowful music before. As bright and chipper and full of energy as 30 something year old Bryan is, I was an emo kid. I've brought this up before. I gotta find some pictures of my teenage selves. Y'all will laugh at me. I can laugh at me too. We can all have a good chuckle about my blunder years as far as fashion and poetry goes. But I was a sad boy. And where was I going with it? Why did I bring this up? Oh, yeah. I've listened to a lot of music that is on the sadder side of things. I don't think any of them felt like this, though. This isn't just sad music by people cosplaying as sad, broken people. Granted, a lot of people who made emo music were probably sad and broken people, but the music didn't sound like it. The music still conformed to whatever would sell. It's probably because I listened to a lot of pop emo. That's a story for another day, I suppose. If there were mall goths, I was a mall emo kid, I suppose. This, though, doesn't feel like it's emo because emo's cool. It just feels like it's a sad album because that's what the people needed to write. And it aligns with that poppier side of emo, that chill, laid back, Midwestern indie vibe with some depressing lyrics on it. But again, it doesn't feel like it was chasing a trend. It just felt like it needed to do things this way because the people writing it were probably sad. The music needed to reflect that. And there's something really earnest about this album, even though I'm really not connecting with it on that musical level. There's a lot of things in here, especially that last track. It's just, I'm not enjoying, but I think that's part of the adventure. That's part of the journey of it. The people making this might not have enjoyed themselves either. They're bearing their souls musically and lyrically. The performance, everything about this is sad in a way that sad music isn't always. In a sense, this doesn't feel performative to me. It feels like a snapshot of an era of these people. And through that lens, it kind of feels sadder. I was initially going to speak about a few of these songs. I don't know that I have a lot to say about the Something duo, but I'll not contain you. Well, I think I've already sort of talked my piece on that regarding specifically the vocal duality, in that I think is really its strongest aspect. But the Gleam Part 2 introduced some really cool instrumentation in it and some of the heaviest dissonance we've had, but I don't know. I feel like that all pales in comparison to that realization it just landed on. It's like talking about the historic element of a piece of land, and then after that and feeling the weight and being in the presence of this, you're like, also these trees are well maintained. Look at the leaves on them. It's like, yeah, I mean it's a nice detail, but like you probably should have started with that because it doesn't feel as important anymore once you hit on something as big as the other topic. Maybe I'll circle back to these in a little bit. I'm gonna hit some lyrics though. Yeah, I'm gonna hit some lyrics. An interesting note is that something, the first something, not the -1. I'm curious about that. We'll touch on it in a second. Um, it says that the track name appears on several of Phil's albums, notably has the same melody and chords as the Gleam Part 2. I didn't pick up on that, but I think it's because of something -1 being in the middle there, where something dash one was noisy, sort of industrial, lots of sounds going on. A massive palate cleanser, to say the least. And so well, we also had I'll Not Contain You in there as well. So there's a lot of music between the two. I wasn't going to necessarily pick that up. But I think that's a nice little nod in there. I'll Not Contain You. Here's something really cool. Somebody in the comments section said this. The comments of Genius. Of course, I'm not reading YouTube comments ahead of time because I'm not a time traveler. It says that Not Contain You sort of sounds like Not Continue. This song is about letting someone go, to not continue pursuing a relationship. And about the pain of that. At one point, he says, "Through climbing arms, I'll reach my loft. Through rotting skin, I'll leave my coffin. Through calloused work, I will grow soft." At least to me, it sounds like the tasks of getting to bed, the pain of waking without this relationship anymore, and the healing process. Verse 3 speaks about looking back on times, much like with, what was that song? Was it the moon? Yeah, it was the moon. When he went back to his ex partner's old house and relived memories. We do that here as well, mentally replaying stuff, but it's all blurry and hazy. Doesn't quite hit as hard. And he says, "I will not contain you." I honestly have no idea what's going on with the Gleam Part 2. I did notice that both the Glow and the Gleam, they're both Part 2s. Part 1 is on their previous album. I'm kind of curious to check into that. I don't think I'm going to do that right now because we barely passed the halfway mark. We're already 2 hours into this. It is a bit outside the scope of the album. Maybe if it were shorter, but being as monstrous as an album it is, I don't want to bloat this too much. Maybe on my own time though. But I'm curious if there's any answers in the Gleam Part 1 to this. This is very short. We got a whole 8 lines here. "I know you've seen the billowy black. You've been blinded by the gleam, and then sight came back. You sent smoke into the sky, and you breathed it back. But I saw what you don't see. I saw tiny lights and mountainous peaks. I saw your future in my sleep." The annotation says that the song's about how Phil's views about his former lover and their future together didn't match with theirs. That they had different ideas of what they wanted out of life. At best, I can see this through where their altered sight shows them. With verse 1 looking at the love interest, theirs is the immediate present. Their sight came back and they sent smoke into the sky. They did something right now. Verse 2, though, looking at our narrator's perspective, when they had an out of body experience, it was the future. One seems to be planning about what comes next, and the other is focused on the here and now. That's not always easy to reconcile. But I don't know that I would have come to that conclusion without the annotation, so it's possible that that's not what the song is about either. I still find it to be a tenuous relationship there between my interpretation and what's written. And it is fully informed by the annotation. Moving on, we have the track map, and then once again a big group of short tracks that will probably split in half. We'll do 2 or so. Once again, the sound floor of the room with just that. Why is that so prominent? What does it mean? Okay, I'll shut up. I'm kind of digging the amorphousness. Ooh, what? I was not expecting any rhythmic syncopation on this album. This comes out of nowhere. I don't think it's fair to say this is my favorite part of the album, but I am absolutely loving this section. This song feels like getting swallowed up by sounds.
You'll be in the air. In some hours you'll be over the sea, lost in the other passengers on the plane. But if you just moved your arms, then you could tell that you are in the air. You'd feel the yawning gulf grow wider. You'd feel the dwindling fuel for your lungs, and your breaths would slow. You'd be in the air. You'd feel the hot blowing rock-filled winds, and the clouds of ash would fill your skies, and you'd smoothly glide. The cold river basin where we spend the night, and again your gaping gap is pink and foggy light. When I wake up, your pat will pounce on me, I'll meet the day. You'll be in the air, I'll be in your bed when I'm awake. And can you tell that I'm down here? Can you feel my hot lungy wind? Was it intense to smell my skin and not lose yourself? I'll look pinkly out your window in the fog, and loud and clearly I'll pick out your resounding roar. You'll be in the air. You'll bear fruit, your bare feet, your bare arms in the heat. You'll be able to feel your mind. It's raining on me. Don't want it to stop. I don't wanna breathe.
Oh, just hanging on to that. Golly. Ah, that's gonna lead into the next one, but I need to take a break here. Remind me, you guys can't remind me of anything. I'm gonna say remind me to rewind that back a little bit so I can get that intro. But this ain't live, so it ain't gonna happen. All right, so Map was yes. But it might be my favorite track on the album so far. The harmonies, the chord progressions, the atmosphere. I mean, what else? It's just the rhythm. I think having those syncopated, bouncy, groovy sections is really interesting. I'm curious what the lyrics are for that one that would suggest this to be a feeling that they're exploring. It feels so out of place against the rest of the album. I mean, it's not like it's the only thing that ever feels out of place. I Want to Be Cold and The Moon both go for like this distorted rock sound, and I've got things to say about that in a bit. But yeah, it's just like this bounciness comes out of nowhere, and it makes you want to move along to it. The rest of the album is very pensive. I wrote something down I want to talk about going on from ah, no, we'll stick with Map for a little bit. Um the harmonies though, the vocal harmonies are so good. Not in their execution. Again, there's still a lot of intonation things that I'm not a huge fan of, but I'm beginning to hear past that. I know this is something I do a lot. It's one of the reasons why even at the beginning of this channel when y'all gave me some really difficult stuff to listen to, stuff way outside of my comfort zone. It's still outside of my comfort zone, but I understand it more now. But like back then, I was just like, what is this noise? And I still had positive things to say about it. When we talk about stuff on the workshopping channel over on Discord, people submit stuff. I need some help with this. How does it sound? Is it good? Should I keep pushing this direction? Even if the production is a bit rough, I'll still tell you all the stuff that's going right in it because I just naturally hear past that. I hear what's on the paper. Is what's written solid? Sometimes production does get in the way, and I will be honest, as y'all have introduced me to more and more production elements, as I've begun to work with production and mixing my own music, it I do favor high quality production more often than not, and I do comment about lower fidelity production more often than I did in the past. But I can still hear past it if I want to. I can hear what the song is, not how the song's being performed. And this sounds probably really weird to a mainstream music listening audience because how it's performed is usually how the song is. But as I've mentioned in the past, coming from classical and jazz music, there's a lot of interpretations of music because usually the person writing it, jazz, this isn't always true, but at least in classical, the person writing it wasn't usually the person performing it. And so interpretation of pieces, especially after composers passed away, it's a big part of it. It's a big part of the genre. And so to me, even though microphones are playing the songs this way, I can also hear a very different version because I'm seeing what's on the paper. I'm seeing what would be written on the sheet music and hearing past the way they're doing it and seeing what's great about the composition itself, which is useful in times like this because I'm not a real big fan of the production all the time. But there is still greatness happening in the album. It's what allows me to appreciate stuff that doesn't sonically work for me, but theoretically is solid. And I think that's where Map lands for me. Those harmonies are amazing. I love actually this is a part of the performance I love is the different timbres. I don't know if there's a new vocalist in here. I've heard Phil do the very centered vocal style that sounds rather close to his speaking range. I've also heard him do a bit more of a falsetto. This other vocal, the one that's center channel in the first half of the track, is in the range of his falsetto, but doesn't sound like his voice. but I don't see a featured artist here. When I look at lyrics and I pause for that, I'm going to go check the wiki, see if there is a featured vocalist here. But there sounds like there's at least two, possibly three different vocal timbres here, and I love the way they're all playing off of one another. The harmonies themselves also sound great, and I love the chord progression. A lot of this album has had a tinge of sorrow to it, a tinge of darkness, but for the most part has worked within that popular indie rock palette of writing chords and progressions and emotions. I wouldn't say anything on here has been musically overwhelmingly heavy. It's sort of that juxtaposition between the weight of the lyrics and the semi lightness in the music at times that I think is an interesting element to look at. It's not atypical to write sad songs against happy music, but this isn't happy music. It just has happy elements to it. But it's not bittersweet either. I'm not quite sure how to describe most of these tracks yet, and I don't know that I'll be able to describe them by the end of the album either. So much of this sounds like the bright indie rock pop of the 2000s. As I've mentioned before, I've heard stuff like this that probably came out after them. This sound overall, aside from the production, is nostalgic for me. The chord progressions, even the vocal timbre and the vulnerable heavy falsetto use, higher range male vocalist stuff. I've heard a lot of stuff like this that came out, like I said, probably after this. Um, and so that all is bright and poppy and cheerful, usually lyrically and musically. And this takes some of that brightness but tinges it down just a little bit and puts weighty, way over dramatic lyrics on top of it. But then we get to Map, and Map brings the weight into the music. And I think it's really interesting to do this. It's not like I Want to Be Cold and The Moon, which brought in heavy distorted guitars. This is harmonically dark. And it fits the lyrics in a way and fits the mood of the album in a way that I don't think they've quite touched on yet. I'm not sure how to feel about it, but I do know that Map hit me a lot better than all the other tracks so far. Like I said, I don't think it's fair to call it my favorite off of the album because it's an outlier. There's nothing else on the album like it. I don't think it's fair to say that the one track where they did something different is the best one on the album. I don't think that's fair, but it is the one that I've enjoyed the most. Now, I Want to Be Cold. Here's something interesting. Anytime we bring in this heavy electric guitar, we heard it in The Moon as well, it overshadows everything. The production isn't ready for it. Everything as far as mixing and balancing sounds go works phenomenally with all the acoustic instrumentation. It falls apart when anything overdriven comes in. The Moon, you could barely hear the vocals in most of it, and that's true through some of this as well. It's almost as if the guitar is given the same prominence that the acoustic guitar is, but the sound is so much bigger. It overwhelms everything. It creates a weight to these moments of the album. I think that from that perspective, it's absolutely amazing. I don't know that it always works in effect, but in theory, having these songs every once in a while bring in this distorted guitar that just overwhelms even the lyrics, I think can speak towards the levels of depression, the depiction of depression represented in this album. To have this one thing cover up all of the work put into it, and for no matter, no matter how loud anything else is, it doesn't overpower this one thing that pops up every once in a while and ruins all the work you put into the rest of the composition, the rest of the work that you're doing. That accurately feels like depression being a juggernaut and coming in and ruining your day. But I don't quite think it ends up working for me. I think that's their intent with it, though. And from that perspective, I think it's pretty cool. It's one of those things that's high concept, where the idea was better than the execution, but I still have to give them a lot of points for the attempt. Now, there is one topic I said we'd get to in a second. Aside from map, many of these tracks lack a groove. They have a beat, but it's four on the floor for the most part. There's no syncopation against it. It's not even really a heavy four on the floor, and the downbeats are often fragmented as multiple instruments all coming in on the downbeats are scattered, some slightly ahead, some slightly behind. There isn't a really great sense of time on here. That's what makes the groovy part of Map stand out so much, and it is a moment of warmth in a rather cold album. It is, I think, the only time I started to move my body with the music. I think I tried earlier, and I was like, I can't. There's just the ambiguity of the downbeats. It just doesn't work well for dancing to this or moving to this, headbanging, whatever you want to call it. And that's put me in a perspective of thinking that this is one of those albums where it's better to turn the lights out, put your headphones on, and lay down on the couch or your bed or chill on a beanbag and absorb it. It's an emotional experience more so than a physical one. I highly doubt, although I'm happy to be proven wrong, if you went to a Microphones concert in the early 2000s, that too many people were bouncing around to this. I doubt there was much headbanging going on. It's probably a bit more of a somber experience, I would wager. It's one of those moments where I realized a bit too late, I think, into the album that I've been listening to it the wrong way. I do think there are things to be gleaned from a more analytical, theoretical approach to this album, but that a majority of worthwhile discussion is going to come from theming, atmosphere, and emotion, and how all of these intersect and overlap more so than specific chord progressions or melodic writing or technical details, tempo and time signature and stuff like that. It is a song that is deeply interested in emotions, in the way that art can make you feel. It isn't too interested in exploring that through depth of complexity, but depth of performance. And it's where a lot of the irregularities end up shining. If this album were produced more cleanly, if they decided to take the best version of each riff and repeat it over and over, copy paste style, rather than what I still think is them literally sitting there and playing the entire 3 minute song or whatever. If they had went in and cleaned up some of the imperfections, tightened up the performance itself, it would not be as good of an album. It might be more sonically palatable, but it would lose so much of its artistic edge and thematic cohesion through that process. Lyrics. Map is, I don't know. The annotation says that it's a continuation from the Gleam Part 2, that in the future he saw mountains and lights. This is supposedly about having a map to these mountains and climbing them, hoping to find resolution in the mountains. It says, the sand, the spark, the open land, the swelling dark, my hands, my airy palms, the lack, my bending back, the size of my empty lap, to distant foothills rise. Yeah, I guess maybe. There's certainly some ideas here about climbing mountains, but overall, I don't quite get that perspective on the lyrical side of things. I did get confirmation though from Wikipedia that two of the engineers on this album, Kayla and Kyle, also did vocals for this track. We'll also hear Kayla's vocals on track 16 as well. We'll hear that in the next grouping of tracks. So yeah, heard three voices. It's another win for my ears on that front, I suppose. They're not always accurate, but sometimes they are, and that's real nice. You'll Be in the Air is a metaphor for the distance between him and this other person. Pretty typical, right? We've explored this topic a few times. In this metaphor, the other person is getting on a plane and leaving, and the distance between them physically increases. It says you'll be in the air, in some hours you'll be over the sea, lost in the other passengers on the plane. Not only are you going to increase in distance, but you're also just sort of going to become part of the people on the plane. As the memories fade, you'll be just another person in my mind. He says, I wish you want to go, though, in a lot of various ways. At one point, though, reminisces about old times. Common thing going on here. But verse 4, I think, is interesting because he almost asks if this other person feels anything about him like he does to them. As we mentioned earlier in Roots, My Roots Are Strong and Deep, he feels so insignificant compared to this other person. He feels so tiny compared to them. And here he kind of questions it all over again. He says, can you tell that I'm down here? You know, the distance. Again, you're up there in the plane. Can you even tell that I'm here? Was it intense to smell my skin and not lose yourself? I think this is an interesting question here. It's about, especially what I think is, scent is so closely tied to memories. And my guess here is it's that last hug. The one that you know is going to be the last. It's not an inadvertent last one where like you just have a regular hug and then just happened to be the no, like in this metaphor of the plane, you know this is it. You have one final hug, they're getting on the plane, they're leaving. He says the smell of this other person's skin was so intense that they lost themselves in it. Did that also happen for you? There's a question here. Was the relationship as important to you as it was to me? Of course, he doesn't get an answer out of it, but given that 14 songs later we're still singing about it, maybe it wasn't for the other person. I Want to Be Cold is one of the most bluntest metaphors on here. So I've already talked about, this album feels cold. It feels interestingly, devoid of life in some places. There's a lot of humanistic qualities to it, but as far as the instrumentation goes, a lot of it is static. It just doesn't move, it doesn't grow, it's not warm, it just is in a lot of ways. Well, this leans into that. If the coldness represents depression, he just wants to be cold. He says it's raining on me and I don't want it to stop. I want soggy ground. I want the water to rise and cover all the land, and I want to swim until my arms give out and come to an end. I hope it happens soon. Once again, going into this super overdramatic direction that I absolutely love. It's so good. The outro says, I want to be cold. I want it to snow so bad. It says, but I hope your flames don't grow. I want to be buried in the snow, and I don't want you to know. I don't want any of this to be rekindled. I don't want to feel your flames, no matter how far away you are. Don't grow them enough for me to feel them. Don't reach out to me ever again. The slightest touch might pull me out of this. And there's the thought here. I don't want you to know that this is who I am. The annotation says it's because the narrator has a feeling that they would come and help, and he doesn't want the pity, but I don't think that that's the perspective on it. I think there's shame in this. He wants all of this, and he knows it's not a good look. He knows this other person would never even try to take him back if they knew how low he had sunk, what he was like today. I don't want you to know that this is who I am. I already feel like I'm pretty small compared to you already. I don't want you to see me when I'm smaller. That's the kind of vibe I get here. Yeah, that's a wild track. Absolutely. Very straightforward. Very noisy, and even the music, like I mentioned, like the moon, it's all about this heavy guitar work drowning out the vocals. If I'm right and the heavy guitar is the sonic representation of depression, this is giving into it. This is allowing that piece of depression to overshadow everything else, to give into it, to allow it to be louder than any other voice you have. All right, we got two more groups of songs, I think. This next one is 4 short ones, and then we'll finish with our 2 longer ones. Let's move into I Am Bored. Oh yeah, thank you for reminding me to rewind it. We'll pull back 5 seconds, I guess. Oh, no, that's just the end of it, huh? There's a lot of this heavy panning throughout this album. Are we gonna get it? There it is! Oh man, it's like a little Easter egg. I don't know. I get so happy when I hear it now.
The heat from the closeness of me tilting towards the sun was storing up to ignite at night and light. The coldness of the cave, the billowy flames lit up my face, and thinning smoke hung in the branches waiting for wind. My front was warm, the cold backs of my arms never felt the dawn. The night was long.
Just a random avant-garde section to the album.
I felt clean and shook my hair out in the light. I looked up and hurt my eyes on the painful, powerful sky. I looked down and felt motion under me. When I looked out across the freeway at the people flying by, I turned my head, I closed my eyes, I felt my size. I recalled my fire and my lack of dawn, my one-sided warmth. I just wanted more. But I'm small, I'm not a friend at all. I'm small, we're all.
There it is. We're gonna get a second one. Yeah. Okay, I can roll with that. I really want to know what the point of that is. What is the purpose behind it?
I thought I felt your shape, but I was wrong. Really, all I felt was falsely strong. I held on tight and closed my eyes. It was dumb, I had no sense of your size. was dumb to hold so tight. But last night, on your birthday in the kitchen, my grip was loose, my eyes were open. I felt your shape and heard you breathing. I felt the rise and fall of your chest. I felt your fall, your winter snows, your gusty blow, your lava flow. I felt it all, your starry night, your lack of light. With limp arms I can feel most of you. I hung around your neck independently, and my loss was overwhelmed by this new depth I don't think I ever felt. But I don't know, my nights are cold, and I remember warmth. I could have sworn I wasn't alone.
Such aggressive picking. Alright. I don't know that I have a lot of new things to talk about regarding these 4 tracks, but I feel like moving into the next 2 and playing like 20 minutes of music combined at 6 tracks overall is just not going to be great either. But I don't want to waste time here. I do want to bring up a couple of things, though, particularly with my experience of the album at this point. That track in particular featured many of the things that I enjoyed from Headless Horseman. Single guitar, single vocalist. There's less areas for the inconsistencies and the imperfections to show up, and thus it's a bit more palatable. But I felt my size, instrumental 2, yeah, they were a bit rough. But here's the thing, at the end of the day, I'm kind of enjoying my time with it. I'm developing an ear for this specific sound, and the eclectic elements are less abrasive to me. I guess primarily it's the intonation. It hasn't really shaped up much over the album, but I'm caring about it less. There's certainly some tones that are very, very dissonant. They're affecting me, that's for sure. But on the whole, it's becoming palatable. Not necessarily a sound I would go out of my way to listen to, but I'm kind of forgetting it happens every once in a while. The dissonance is becoming normal in a way that just feels like what they're doing, and I'm ignoring it more and more as the album goes on. But I am finding that they have shifted to just more odd ideas in general, kind of shifting away from indie rock to avant-garde ideas, experimental concepts. I don't always know that they work. They feel a bit rough, and even in retrospect, now that I've introduced the word avant-garde to the discussion, I Want to Be Cold and The Moon feel kind of avant-garde in a way that they sort of smash together the acoustic guitar indie rock vibe against a distorted heavy post rock post metal guitar, and I don't even know what kind of music would you call that super fuzzy indie rock stuff. There's still an independent element under all of this, both in like traditional composition and of course the production of it all. But there's some sounds in here that just absolutely don't feel like they fit the vibe of the other 97.63% of the album. It's those oddities that I couldn't quite place what they were doing here until I thought of the word avant-garde, and that's where things started to click. They're eccentric in a way that feels purely experimental. Hey, why couldn't we do this? Hey Phil, we could. Then let's do it. It's like they don't even question if it helps or benefits it. It's just, it's where he wants the music to go, so he does it. And I've switched from they to he, despite 12 people being part of the production of this. There's only one performer. Phil does the guitar, the vocals, and most of the instruments is what he's listed as, although as far as I can tell, the only other person doing any instrumental work is Carl on saxophone for track 3, which was, I hope, nope, which was The Moon. Oh yeah, the sax was in The Moon, that's right. That was a that was a fun outro to that track, even if it was, again, a bit abrasive, doing something that I should like and pairing it with something I don't. It's something that just happens so much on here. Everybody else listed, though, aside from Kayla and Kyle doing the vocals on track 12 and 16, everyone else is listed as an engineer or a masterer or having done the artwork. Phil does all of the instruments. From that perspective, it's dawned on me earlier. I said these songs all feel like they're done in one take. They're not. They can't be. There's 3 guitars at any one time. It's possible that Phil decided to bring in other guitarists for the studio just to play them for the recording, but it also makes more sense to me given the type of control that Phil has over the album that he also recorded things track by track. But it still makes me feel like a lot of this was done in one take. I think there's very little digital copying, pasting going on. Anything else? Anything specific to these tracks? No, I don't think so. I Am Bored is lyrically about the end of a relationship. It says, you tore a hole so deep my leak poured out torrentially. This referring to having your heart ripped out and bleeding everywhere. It says, but now I'm bored. My bloody flow is slowed, so I can be bored near you. Very interesting. I think this is at the end of a relationship, but not having it over yet. As if they got into they got into an argument. Things were said that absolutely devastated him. He says, "But I've healed up from that, and I can be bored near you." By the end of it, though, he talks about how boring everything is, and that we both know what we have to do. Which, assuming, is to end the relationship. I felt my size is another indication of his self-insignificance. He compares himself to the planet, but this time he's not a tree, he's just a person, so he's even smaller this time. He explains of how nearby a cave he feels flames lighting up one side of his body while the other side remains cold. He eventually climbs up over a hill and feels movement underneath. Looking across, he sees a freeway. He closes his eyes and feels how small he is compared to all of this, and how he's only warm on one side of his body. with the outro line being, I'm small, I'm not a planet at all. Once again, as I mentioned, him coming to terms with the feeling of insignificance that he has, particularly against the size of the planet, which he has used as a metaphor for this other person before. I felt your shape is about hugging. It's about closeness to people in a physical sense, but also I think an emotional one. He says, I felt your shape. At one point, he even says, I had no sense of your size. I don't think it's about a physicality to that all. I think it's about the closeness of being with somebody, hugging being one of the most physically close things you can do. It's your body against theirs. You don't really get much closer aside from fusing. And using that as a jumping off point to look at emotional connection and closeness until you get to a point where you see somebody for who they are and not really liking that person. He uses some physical metaphors here about squeezing too tightly, feeling your shape, and my eyes were being opened, and as they were, my grip was loosened. This idea of seeing somebody's true self, getting to know them more and more, and finding out who they are, and kind of not wanting that closeness anymore. He says, I felt your fall, your winter snows, your gusty blow, your lava flow. I felt it all, your lack of light. I think this is a very important line in this entire story because it is called the glow. Warmth and light sources are something he's been seeking this entire album, and at this point he realizes this person doesn't have what he's been searching for. He says, with limp arms I can feel most of you. I hung around your neck independently, and my loss was overwhelmed by this new depth I don't think I ever felt. But I don't know. My nights are cold, and I remember warmth. I could have sworn I wasn't alone. It was at this moment he really thought this was the person for him to spend the rest of his life with. It was the light, the glow, the warmth he wanted. And he got too close, and he realized it's not. Maybe they did something, maybe they said something, maybe this is a callback to just 3 tracks ago with I Am Bored when they got into the argument and and the other person ripped his heart out. But at this point, he feels alone even next to this other person. All right. We're going to move on. Check out the next one on the list. This one's called Samurai Sword. We're going to run this into our final track. It's about 14 minutes combined, and it's going to take us to the end of the album and the end of the video. So let's dive into it and see how Phil wraps up this album. This is just so overwhelming, which I suppose makes sense after the realization we just had. But still, this is a lot. It just abruptly stops in the middle of it. Oh, but we got the. What is this supposed to represent? Like I said at the beginning, one time it's eccentric, two times as a pattern. We've heard this on several tracks. I mean, is it just supposed to be the void? The way that he feels the nothingness? A lone note amidst mostly silence? It's kind of eerie and creepy too. I don't know why. Like, it's just one note, it doesn't have harmonic context, but it feels tense.
It's dark, the sun went down, the power's still out. Oh, it's cold, my blood barely flows. Oh, I'm alone, except for the sound of insects flying around. They know my red blood is warm still.
A little bit of a heartbeat. There's still 6 minutes left. Is this how the album ends? It's just silence? I was gonna say that was a more pure silence. There was less of the room ambience there. This is making me acutely aware of time. I was fine up till here, but now I'm like, dang, I've been standing for a while. My feet are starting to ache. Sure would like this to be over. A guitar? I don't know why I like turn my ear towards the monitor like it's gonna help me hear anything. I was a little worried putting these two tracks back to back. I'm like, 14 minutes is a lot of music to digest. And I want to have a good finale bit to the video, right? Wrap things up. There's no music in this one, though. I'm glad I ran them together because nothing really to discuss on this one. And by that I mean I have a lot of things to say about it. Those are snippets of little ideas, right? Just super quiet. thinking maybe that sounded like something on the album, but it's such a vague idea. It's chords, bum bum ba-dum ba-dum. Yeah, I mean just a rhythm and one chord. It could be anything. This album had a lot of distinct sounds. I think I'd pick up if they were directly playing something we heard. Back to the heartbeat sounds. Well, Samurai Sword is angry. Very angry. It's interesting because it feels similar to I Want to Be Cold and The Moon in the fact that we have distorted guitar completely overshadowing everything else, but I don't really feel like overshadowing is the right word for Samurai Sword. It seems to be a bit more cohesive where the angsty guitar work is paired well with the vocal lines and the drums more so than overwhelming everything, overshadowing, being louder than. I'm not sure what to make of that, but my gut says anger rather than being swallowed up. Although anger is just what I hear in a lot of heavier distorted works too, so maybe that's not completely accurate. But it is a different vibe than the other two. I want to make sure that that point is clear in this analysis. It uh, it uses the distortion for a different effect, even if I'm not quite sure how to put that into words. We do get a little bit of a light, a levity towards the end of Samurai Sword that pulls us into My Warm Blood, which is a very short excerpt. I think it's like a minute and a half, 2 minutes maybe, of acoustic guitar and vocals, right? And then the void. The void that we've heard at the end of so many tracks. What is going on here? I need some lyrics. I'm not going to be able to make anything of worth conversation wise here without knowing what we're discussing. So I'm going to dig into that. Samurai Sword is about. Well, he even calls himself Samurai Phil in this track, so I'm going to assume most of these songs are autobiographical in some sort of way. It's about Phil metaphorically fighting his demons, in this case, a bear? Interesting. It says you're a bear foraging for a kill, your massive paws pressed down the snow. Well, I have my bare feet touching bark right above you silently. I lower down my icy stare, and you smell the air. I've got a samurai sword meant for you, polar bear. I've got a grisly look in my eye. I really like that double entendre there. So he's sitting up in a tree, ready to pounce on a polar bear, and this polar bear, I am going to presume, is a metaphor for his depression. That's what I thought before reading the annotations, and they say that it's a metaphor about his ex. I think they're kind of one and the same, but I don't think that that's a great view given the rest of the text. He's not trying to overcome this other person, though they did hurt him. He's trying to overcome his still love for them. He's trying to get out of depression because he wants them to come back. He needs to let go of this part of him. I think that's what he's trying to kill here. It doesn't make any sense for him to be battling a metaphorical representation of his ex. Regardless, he jumps down and says, I'm plummeting through branches toward you now. A little bit of time passes in the music, and it says, feeling still, Samurai Phil. The assumption here is that he's no longer moving because he's been killed or on the brink of death from the battle. This takes us into My Warm Blood, which is 4 lines long. It's dark. The sun went down. The power's still out. It's cold. My blood barely flows. I'm alone, except for the sound of insects flying around. They know my red blood is warm still. This has a lot of callbacks into it about it being dark, something he wanted previously, anything other than the gray. And he said the sun's gone down, power's out, it's cold. He specifically wanted to be cold. He says, my blood barely flows. If you remember back to, I think, the first track, and he was talking about his blood pumping wildly or something like that. He says, I'm alone, still. Well, he doesn't say still, but I'm adding that he's been alone this whole time, but he brings it up clearly here. There are insects around, though, and they're ready to feed on his blood, I suppose. They know that it's still warm. I don't know, do insects drink blood? Mosquitoes do, right? I don't know about other insects. Oh, there's still a circle of life, though, decomposition and stuff. I suppose he's saying that the insects haven't jumped on him yet because they know he's still technically alive. Regardless, the rest of this song is the heartbeat and then the void. And according to the annotations, the sounds that fluctuate in and out are parts of this album, fading in and out as if going through memory lane on the end of his, on his deathbed. He attempted to overcome his darkness, to push forward, and failed, is how I read this. The depression won. Maybe a bit of a spoiler, but a sequel album did come out years later titled Mount Erie, which I think we've listened to a song from, but also this group ended up renaming themselves to Mount Erie, and I know we've checked out a song from that band, so maybe we never actually checked out a song from the album Mount Erie. Regardless, that album begins just like this one ends, with the void. To wrap this up, I still feel like this album does what it does very well. It's highly emotional, exceptionally overdramatic, but I think relatable to a lot of people. It heightens the experiences of heartbreak, of the ends of relationships, friendships ending, and even on a more less metaphorical way, just having friendships and relationships die out, not for anything nefarious, They just end. I think You'll Be in the Air does a great job of that, though there's still parts of it that lean into a more metaphorical realm. It's an album about loss in every way, about feeling lesser about yourself after every failed relationship, platonic or romantic. It's about always sizing yourself up against everyone else while also putting everyone else up on a pedestal. You'll never be as big as they are, and subsequently, they'll never be as big as you make them. And I think that's what was really interesting, and I felt my size. No, I felt your shape. He had this idea of this other person, and they couldn't even live up to that. There's no way he can live up to anyone else. It is about a broken person continuing to break down increasingly over time. And they do make a massive leap to change things, to be their own wind that they want to help move them, and ultimately fail through that. Musically, I think this works really well. It's still not my cup of tea. There's a few tracks on here I'd like to come back to, but overall, especially given how many short single idea tracks are in here, it's not something I would want to come back to wholesale. I'm fine with having listened to this album just once. Regardless, though, I do think it is a fantastic work of art, completely cohesive in its intent and execution, and tells the story that they wanted to in a way that both completely fits what they're attempting to do and fits their vision, but also feels distinctly them. I think other bands could attempt something like this, but I don't think any other band would have made this. It's distinctly the Microhones. And it's not a fun journey, but it's a journey they made nonetheless, and one that we are invited to join in alongside and not just hear a story of heartbreak, but be able to feel it and easily put ourselves in the narrator's shoes as well. Those are my thoughts on the Microhones, The Glow Part 2. Let me know yours. Did you enjoy this? Is there anything in here that stood out to you? Maybe some stuff that I touched on you'd like to expand on, or maybe just your own perspectives and opinions about it. Let me know down in the comments. Above that, in the description box, there's a link to Linktree. It takes you to this menu right here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. UTC. We're going to do a live stream, the last one for January. I think it's going to be a little on the shorter side. We only have 8 tracks, I think, queued up for tomorrow. It should still run about 2 hours, though. If you don't get there exactly when we start it, there's plenty of time to join in afterwards. It's just a really fun hangout session where we listen to some cool music. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.